When a mother kills her own flesh and blood, she breaks a sacred bond.
I had to accept that they weren't coming back.
How can we comprehend a woman who drowns her 2 young boys?
In a dark car, they're floating and they're screaming for their mother.
That is not how Jesus teaches us to behave.
A deadly delusion drives a mother to destroy the family she loves.
She held them down. They fought her for their lives.
And a killer mom's lie alters medical history.
His paper was used for almost a quarter of a century as a license to kill.
These are deadly women who murder their own. They are mothers who kill. It's 1964 in upstate New York. Newlyweds Tim and Wanita Hoit look forward to the birth of their first child.
Wanita said that her mother always told her that she was good for one thing, and that was to make babies, to have children.
Doing well. Have a good day at work.
But none of her children will live for long. She secretly murders them. Her first victim is 3-month-old Eric. Home alone together, Wanita smothers him.
Smothering an infant is, unfortunately, a very easy thing to do, and it shows no marks.
Investigating Wanita's story, husband and wife writing team Jamie Talon and Richard Firstman discover a cold, distant killer.
Wanita didn't seem to grieve as you would expect a mother to grieve.
You know, when you have a baby, you take the baby in your arms, you hold the baby. She would never do that. She was very distant. If you look at pictures, she kept them, you know, at arm's distance.
At the time, Wanita's coldness goes unnoticed. 3 years later, she strikes again, taking 2 lives in just 2 weeks. Her 6-week-old daughter and her 2-year-old son.
I don't think you can even call her a mother. Anybody who takes their children away cannot be called a mother.
No one suspects Wanita, especially her husband, Tim. Instead, murder is misdiagnosed as illness, a frightening new disease taking young children in their sleep. The doctors call it SIDS.
SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome. And basically, this is a diagnosis that is given to children under 1 year of age who die in their crib, who die while they're asleep. The only time a forensic pathologist will certify a death as due to SIDS is when they've ruled out all other possibilities.
Doctors are left trying to explain the deaths rather than police. When Wanita and Tim are expecting their 4th child, one doctor is determined to stop another family tragedy.
Dr. Alfred Steinschneider was sort of recreating his research world to understand why babies die inexplicably for no apparent reason. And along came Wanita Hoit. Here he could follow the 4th baby and maybe The key to unraveling SIDS was in his hands.
Wanita's new daughter, Molly, is monitored at Dr. Steinschneider's sleep clinic.
She was a happy little girl. She was just a joy to have around, you know, just a sweet little girl.
Corinne Dower was one of the nurses who cared for baby Molly.
Molly came in as a SIDS patient. We rocked her, we walked her, we fed her, and she was doing well.
So how's she doing today, nurse? She's doing much better. Responding already. Well, I'll leave you some.
The nurse's only cause for concern is Molly's mother. She seems distant, uncomfortable with intimacy.
She never hugged it, never kissed it, never said, you know, anything. She just, and I thought that's a little strange.
And that's kind of what led them to suspect that there was something else going on here. They have this mother who seems to really have no connection to the baby. And then these babies are dying mysteriously.
The nurses believe this medical investigation should be a murder investigation. Their boss doesn't agree.
Yes, nurse.
I'm really concerned about Wanita Hoit and her nurse child, Molly.
In what way?
I'm sorry.
The nurses were very vocal in expressing to Dr. Steinschneider what they felt was going on here.
Doctor, it's just too suspicious.
And several of them went to him and said flat out that she's killing her babies.
What are you basing this on, feeling or facts?
Corinne's worst fears unfold.
Enough. Now, I'm very busy, so if you don't mind.
Because Dr. Steinschneider, he discharged her. And I said, if you send her home, that lady is going to kill her. And he said, you're just another hysterical nurse. So what can you do?
Baby Molly Hoyt is sent home with her mother. It would simply be a matter of time.
And then about 11:15, when we were getting ready to go off duty, I said, Joyce, what do you think? Do you think she's still alive? And of course, when I came on duty the next day, she was dead.
Wanita Hoit has mysteriously lost 4 children in 4 years. Her doctor blames sudden infant death syndrome.
Oh, isn't he adorable?
Her nurses have the correct diagnosis. This mother is a killer.
The nurses suspected it, but they had no power to investigate.
Look, I've heard enough.
And people didn't want to believe that a mother would kill her own children.
When Wanita has her 5th child, SIDS researcher Dr. Alfred Steinschneider thinks he is on the cusp of medical history.
He was looking for families with these multiple deaths because he wanted to bring the next child into the laboratory to see if there was any way that they could figure out why babies die of SIDS.
The doctor is developing a breakthrough theory that SIDS is hereditary. Wanita Hoyt's tragedy seems the perfect case to prove it.
See you, big fella.
After monitoring the newborn in his clinic, he sends him home with his mother. The nurses protest. But Dr. Steinschneider is determined to prove his theory.
doctor's office.
It's happened again.
Is there something wrong, Doctor?
They wept when he died.
Noah Hoyt has died.
This one nurse said she couldn't even look at Dr. Steinschneider.
I warned you.
She said, I told you so. I told you so.
Medical research allows another murder.
You really can't distinguish between SIDS and what they call a gentle smothering. So when you don't have any really hard evidence, it's very difficult to make an accusation.
With every tragic death, Wanita Hoit gets more attention. It's exactly what she wants. She suffers from a disturbing psychological illness, Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
And this is basically where women, it's almost always women, will cause illnesses or even deaths in their own children in order to gain sympathy and attention for themselves. Wanita Hoit is, you can't think of a more classic case than hers.
But in 1971, Wanita isn't diagnosed or investigated. Dr. Steinschneider publishes her case as proof that SIDS is hereditary. He becomes famous as doctors around the world follow his research.
Steinschneider had the chance to intercede, to save these babies, and yet what he did was take these cases, take these deaths, and turn them into a theory that was fraudulent. So he used these deaths to advance his own career. And there's really nothing more cynical than that.
For the next 22 years, SIDS research is sent off on the wrong track. And Wanita Hoit, child killer, remains free. Until District Attorney Bill Fitzpatrick takes a look at Dr. Steinschneider's research paper.
Pretty obvious to me that they were talking about the murders of 5 children.
Bill Fitzpatrick believes the doctor's theory allowed Wanita and other mothers to murder with impunity.
His paper was used for almost a quarter of a century as a license to kill.
Sergeant, I brought in my photographs of my babies just to show you how beautiful they were.
Aged 46, Wanita Hoit is called in for an interview.
I was actually watching through a glass partition, and Trooper Mulvey, in a very, very gentle voice, told her, Wanita, this is not the way the kids died.
These are my babies. My babies.
In our wildest dreams, we didn't think we would get a confession. You don't have any crime scene photos. You don't have any eyewitnesses because Wanita was the only one there when the babies died.
You're telling me that this was all coincidence?
And there came a time where she, put her head down for a second. I'll never forget these words. She looked up in a very sorrowful voice and said, I've asked God so many times to forgive me.
In 1995, Wanita Hoit is convicted of 5 murder counts and sentenced to 75 years in prison. Dr. Steinschneider's theory is in tatters.
SIDS does not run in families, but murder does.
Instead, SIDS research refocuses on infant sleeping positions with amazing success.
They suggested something called the back to sleep movement. And what was found was stunning. The incidence of SIDS dropped from 5.6 per 1,000 deaths to less than 0.5 per 1,000 deaths. In other words, only 1 infant death in 2,000 births. This has been amazing.
In 1998, Wanita Hoit died in prison of cancer. This murderous mom helped mislead SIDS researchers, costing countless lives. She gave an alibi to other mothers who would kill their babies. And she murdered her own 5 children.
This was a woman who craved a lot of attention. A sad person who nobody really understood the complexity of her sadness until it was too late.
Some mothers murder for attention. Others kill for love while under a deadly delusion. On a summer's morning, a young family are playing happily in their living room. But these 5 children are in terrible danger. Their own mother is tortured by a monstrous urge. She wants to kill them.
There was all these crazy things going through her head, driving her to places that she didn't want to go. No one could believe that a mother would do this.
No one has ever encountered a mother like Andrea Yates.
It was just absolutely incomprehensible. This is the whole symbol of motherly love turned upside down.
To their friends in Houston, Texas, Rusty and Andrea Yates are a loving, devout couple.
I believe we got it right here.
There's no question but that there was a bond of love between the two. Andrea was extremely devoted to Rusty. Everything, at least from the outside looking in, appeared to be as normal as one family could be.
But Rusty Yates has extreme religious views.
This was a guy who firmly believed that women were secondary to their husbands. A woman had to submit to their husband. Their whole purpose in life was to have children. And so, I mean, that's why she had 5, 7 and under. It was whatever God blessed them with, that's what they had.
Now then, you lads, you can call me Sergeant, just like you can call Jesus.
Each of their 5 children is named after a biblical character. Noah, age 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and Mary, 6 months.
Jesus looks at us all the time, and he knows when we're bad, and he knows when we're good.
Andrea pays a heavy psychological price for her repeated pregnancies.
Noah, come back, please. I told you, come back to the circle. Come back here and listen to the story.
Andrea had mental issues before she became the mother of 5 young children. Having all those children added so much stress to her life that her psychiatric illness flourished.
Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong has seen Andrea's illness before, postpartum psychosis.
As a psychiatric nurse, I treated many women who had this disorder.
That's Satan listening to you and talking to you. Now you listen to Mommy.
A woman becomes so severely depressed after the birth of a child that the depression spirals down into a psychosis. They are really out of touch with reality. These women may hear voices or become delusional.
The voices in Andrea's head tell her Satan will take her children.
She thought that she was a bad mother, and because she was a bad mother, all of her children were going to go to hell.
Author Diane Fanning sees each new child adding to Andrea's psychosis.
Russell once found her in a bathroom holding a knife up to her throat and ready to commit suicide.
No!
So she had a serious mental health issue.
That is not the way.
She was obsessed with these dark, dark thoughts about what a horrible mother she was.
Boys.
And how the little tiny things that her children did were just dreadful, dreadful sins.
Noah!
Because that's what the voices were telling her.
Noah, quit it! That is not how Jesus teaches us to behave!
What about this one?
For 2 years, she is in and out of psychiatric treatment. But the healthcare system limits her stays.
The mental health professionals did not feel that she should be leaving. The insurance ran out, and there was no way they could pay for it without the insurance.
Psychiatrists also warn against having any more babies. Husband Rusty has other ideas. His fundamentalist religion demands another child. After the arrival of Andrea's 5th baby, Mary, she hatches a plan to protect her children. Satan can't take them to hell if she sends them to heaven first.
She loved them so much that she took their lives.
In Houston, Texas, Rusty and Andrea Yates have a new addition to their family. 6-month-old Mary is their 5th child and first daughter. Her birth will trigger a terrible event.
It was a fairly rapid decline in Andrea's mental health after the birth of Mary. It was obvious that she was becoming increasingly ill. And she was spiraling down into this black hole of a psychotic delusion.
Andrea truly believed to the core of her being that she was a bad mother, that the devil was going to get her children and take their souls to hell. The only way to save her children, she believed, was to kill them so their souls would go to heaven to be with Jesus and they would be saved. She believed this with every fiber of her being.
Noah, take that out of your brother's mouth.
On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Andrea acts on her deadly delusion.
Sit down now. Come on, honey. Let's just leave those for kids. Huh? Noah, you come and take charge of your mother, okay? I gotta go, huh?
Rusty kissed the kids goodbye, not realizing that it was the last time he would see them alive. And he leaves for work.
Andrea Yates very carefully filled the bathtub with water.
One by one, Andrea takes her children into the bathroom.
She drowned them in the tub, held them down. They fought her for their lives.
Noah, the eldest, is the last of the 5 children to die.
As she drug him back to the bathroom to drown him, he kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Because like little children often do, Noah took the guilt onto himself. Because we all, when we're little, think our parents are perfect. And whatever we do, we deserve it.
Tenderly, Andrea places her children's dead bodies together, clasping baby Mary's hand in her brother's.
It's almost as if little brother is taking care of baby sister on the road to eternity. Andrea absolutely believed she was saving their souls. There's no question about it.
Calmly, Andrea calls her husband.
You need to come home.
After Andrea drowned the children, she did not try to cover up her crime. She called the police and told them to come over. She called her husband and told him to come home. Why would she do that if she believed what she had done was wrong? There's no explanation. She wouldn't.
Rusty stands by the wife who murdered his own flesh and blood.
He realizes that mental illness caused what occurred. He's never blamed her for taking the lives of their children.
Under Texan law, Andrea Yates faces death by lethal injection.
She should have been put into a hospital right away, but instead she was put on trial, threatened with a death sentence. She wasn't a heinous capital murderer. She was a sick, sick woman, and she needed help, not the spectacle of a trial.
I don't think a civilized society should ever execute the mentally ill when they are compelled to commit a crime because of their illness.
But she wants to be executed.
She didn't want a trial. She didn't want me as a lawyer. She wanted to go immediately to death row because she believed in her unreal world that Satan lived within her. And by being executed, she would save the world from the devil.
Andrea Yates escapes the death penalty. In March 2002, she is sentenced to life in prison.
There is so much tragedy in the story of Andrea Yates. 5 children had their lives taken away before they really had a chance to live them. That is just so inconceivably horrible. 5 children at once. Andrea, too. She is a victim of her own mental health. She will never, ever recover from this.
A quiet fall night.
Somebody help me, please! Somebody!
Shattered by a mother's frantic screams. Her 2 children have been kidnapped.
A black man's taking my baby! A black man's taking my baby!
She stopped at a traffic light on Highway 49. She said that a man jumped in the car and told her to get out.
Get off the car! Right there! In the back seat!
And he just got in the car and drove away.
I try not to even think about what those kids faced because it can become overwhelming.
I can't! I can't!
1,
1994, the town of Union, South Carolina. The kidnapping of Susan Smith's 2 boys grips the country.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'm Sheriff how well-to-do me are David and Susan Smith. Their 2 young boys are missing.
Michael Smith is 3 years old. His brother, Alex, just 14 months.
To whoever has our boys, we ask that you please don't hurt them. Bring them back.
Their father, David Smith, still feels the pain today.
It's probably the worst gut feeling I'd ever had, and maybe still I've ever had.
Please return our children to us safe and unharmed.
I loved my children very much. And they were, all I had.
The boys disappear at a time when David and Susan's marriage is in trouble.
It was a pretty rocky marriage from the beginning.
She fell for somebody that was actually her supervisor where she worked. And so things started falling apart.
Susan is in love with Tom Findlay, a wealthy local businessman.
So when are we going to meet next?
Soon. I promise you.
Anytime before the weekend?
In the middle of '94, we decided to separate, and we filed for divorce.
But as the search for their children continues, David and Susan are united in grief. As newspaperman Gary Henderson watches Susan, his reporter's instinct kicks in.
I never saw any real tears. I heard sounds that sounded like someone trying to cry.
I don't know how else to put it, and I can't imagine life without them.
Susan, you know that?
I noticed immediately she was speaking in the past tense, and that sort of sent a flag up for me. Why would you be speaking of these kids in the past tense if you really thought they were still out there alive somewhere?
Law enforcement officers are also skeptical. They put Susan on a lie detector.
Susan continually failed one question on the polygraph. Do you know where your children are?
To me, it was she was failing them because she was distraught. She was so upset. She had just had her kids, literally ripped from her.
But prosecutor Tommy Pope is becoming suspicious. Susan keeps changing her story about the carjacking.
So when law enforcement's not getting accurate information by arguably the person that has the most vested interest in giving it to you, naturally questions arise.
Susan, now, we've been over this and over this. I'm not here to hear your story again.
The investigators turned up the heat and really leaned on Susan.
I don't know.
Any black man with 2 white boys in the back of his car, they would have seen him.
Because they actually knew that she was lying.
They don't believe your story. They don't believe you're describing a real person.
What they needed to do was get her to confess because they needed to find those boys.
Will you pray with me?
Okay.
Sheriff Wells utilized a well-known technique in police interrogations, and that is what we call the come to Jesus talk.
Please bless our sons, Michael and Alex. Bring them safely back to you, O Lord.
He appealed to her sense of decency and fear of God to get the truth.
Amen.
After 9 days of lies, Susan admits to the awful truth.
I killed my boy. I drove them into the lake. And I threw them in. I drove them into the lake.
In South Carolina, police have spent 9 days searching for 2 missing boys. But the little boys haven't been kidnapped. They've been murdered, drowned by their own mother.
I had to accept that, we weren't gonna find them. That they weren't coming back.
David Smith now knows the terrible truth about what his wife has done.
It was more of a shock when I found out that she had confessed to doing it. Because I had stood by her for 9 days, and I believed every story, every lie that she told, I believed her.
It was hard to look at her and believe she could have done something like that. And I think that's what everybody had a problem with.
The vast majority of mothers who kill their children do so accidentally in a fit of rage. They go to hit the child, and they hit the child too hard. That is not what was happening with Susan Smith.
Susan is haunted by a violent past.
Not listen to you anymore. I came in like 5 minutes ago. What the hell are you doing? You sitting there on the couch?
A lot of things happen to Susan that don't happen to other people.
Push me, huh? You think you can push me and get away with it? Yeah. I don't think so. Let's not.
Susan did have a very hard childhood coming up. Her father killed himself when she was very small. She was molested by her stepfather.
Susan could not handle rejection from a male. This is not uncommon among female sex abuse victims as adults that were abused by their fathers. They cannot stand the rejection of a man. It tears them apart.
On the day the boys disappear, Susan suffers the rejection that she dreads.
She was hoping to marry Tom Finley. Tom Finley wrote her a letter and told her that he didn't want kids. And so that was a problem for Susan because she really wanted to marry Tom Finley.
The letter is the catalyst for Susan's cold-hearted decision.
Susan cared about herself. She was very narcissistic, with a little bit of sociopathy mixed in there, and her need for the attention of all the men that she wanted. It made for a very, very dangerous cocktail for those 2 little boys.
Shattered by her abandonment, Susan straps her boys in the car and drives to a nearby lake.
She decided they were in the way and they were causing her pain. And so she merely was getting rid of the source of the pain.
Susan stopped at the top of that ramp, which is a pretty good fall down to the lake. She opened the door and hopped out. She took her car out of gear and let the car go.
She said that when the guy took her kids, that They were screaming, "Mommy, Mommy." I bet they were. In a dark car that's now rolled down into the lake, and they're floating, and they're screaming for their mother.
Who knows how long it took the children to die? How long did they float out there before the car turned upside down and dropped into the water?
In the car, there would have been panic. They were restrained in their car seats, so they could only reach up just far enough to keep their nose above water. In all likelihood, they would have experienced panic, terror, as they could no longer get a breath.
Michael and Alex are found 9 days later, still strapped into their car seats.
When the diver found that the car's upside down, you know, it's murky because it's been filled with water, and the lake water was dark. But he saw a small hand kind of pressed against the glass. A lot of guys I'd worked with for years, grown men who had worked hard on this case, that had struggled to try to bring those boys back home, and they were just openly weeping.
In July 1995, Susan Smith is found guilty of 2 counts of murder.
Susan's unusual in that the murder of her sons was premeditated, very cold-hearted, very cold-blooded. It had nothing to do with losing her temper. It all had to do with making her life temporarily better. And in that regard, she's a very unusual mother. Thank God.
Susan is sentenced to 30 years in prison. David Smith still lives every day with what she did.
There's no answer to give somebody on how to deal, especially with the loss of a child. You have to find it inside yourself. I forgave Susan for what she did a long time ago, because to me it was, keeping that in was letting her win, and I had to let that go to move on. I don't ultimately think that death would have been the best punishment, because this way now she has to live with, she has to wake up with every day what she did to Michael and Alex.
These deadly women defeated their strongest instinct. Wanita Hoit lived half her life with the most awful secrets. Rejected by her lover, Susan Smith responded with a terrible sacrifice. And Andrea Yates was so deluded, she drowned her 5 children to save their souls. Most women would die to save their children. But for these mothers, the drive to protect was defeated by an urge to kill.